Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Garrell, and thank you for participating in today's 621st Justice Clearinghouse webinar, Incorporating the Minimum Required Operating Standards into Your Agency's NIBIN Organizational Lifestyle. Whether initiating or enhancing a preventive crime gun strategy, the ATF National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, also known as NIBIN, must be a cornerstone of your initiative. To help crime labs and law enforcement agencies implement a successful NIBIN program, ATF and the NIBIN National Crime Gun Intelligence Governing Board implemented the minimum required operating standards in 2018. And during our webinar today, our presenters will discuss specific strategies that have been incorporated to achieve the MROS criteria, as well as how this can lead to successful prosecutions and prosecutorial initiatives. We have three fantastic presenters for you today. Michael Eberhardt is up and is a national crime gun intelligence strategist with over 27 years of experience as a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and is the owner of Crime Gun Investigations and Consulting. Michael has worked with ATF's National Integrated Ballistic Information Network since 2001, conducting violent crime gun investigations in cities across the country. And in 2014, he became the supervisor of ATF's Crime Gun Intelligence Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Prior to retiring, Mr. Eberhardt served as the chief of ATF's Firearms Operating Division, where he led the design and implementation of national level strategy and policy related to ATF's NIBIN and CGIC programs. We also have Suzanne Cromer, who is a forensic scientist and the NIBIN program administrator with the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Ms. Cromer is a member of the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners and a training coordinator for the Firearms Department. And last but not least is Justin Holloway. Justin is an assistant U.S. attorney in the District of South Carolina, where he serves as the district's Project Safe Neighborhoods coordinator. As a prosecutor, Justin tried over 50 cases with jury verdicts and has specialized in violent crime prosecutions since 2014. I'd like to take a few minutes and thank our sponsor for this webinar. Ultra Electronics Forensic Technologies is a leader in forensic analysis, providing innovative and effective solutions like its unique technology, the Integrated Ballistics Identification System. Forensic technology helps experts obtain timely information so that they can make society a safer place. And we so value working with partners like Ultra Electronics Forensic Technology as we seek to educate the community. Now, the last few things I'd like to address with everyone is some basic housekeeping items. First, this event is being recorded and the formal presentation is scheduled to last about 60 minutes and will be available to subscribers on the Justice Clearinghouse website. Second, this is a listen-only event, but you can type in any questions you have through the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll take as many of those questions as possible at the end of the formal presentation. Next, if you experience audio issues during the webinar, such as the sound coming in and out intermittently, consider dialing in using the phone number included in your emailed invite. And when the system asks for a PIN, you can just bypass that by hitting the pound key. Now, we have incorporated a polling question into this webinar. You'll need access to your mouse to participate. And I would actually like to ask the first question, which is for law enforcement agencies and crime lab personnel. Please select one of the following options, which best applies to your agency's submission of ballistic information into NIBIN. Do you use IBIS equipment that is owned and operated by your agency? Do you use IBIS equipment that is owned or operated by a different agency as part of maybe a regional initiative? Do you submit your evidence to an ATF state or county crime lab? And the last option is our county is currently not submitting our ballistic evidence into NIBIN. And of course, we do have that final option of not applicable if you're not a crime lab personnel or law enforcement agency. We'll give folks about another 10 seconds or so to respond to this. And by the way, if you're not able to submit your vote, it may be because you need to exit full screen mode out of GoToWebinar and go to multi-screen windows. And I'm going to go ahead and close down the poll and share the results here. All right. 56% of you indicated that you utilize IBIS equipment that is owned or operated by your own agency. Tied at 11%, you either use IBIS equipment that is operated by another agency, or another 11% said that they submit their evidence to an ATF, state, or county crime lab. And 4% of you indicated that you don't submit ballistic evidence in an NIBIN. Thanks again for participating in that survey. Now, I do want to point out that our presenters have made several wonderful handouts available to you through the GoToWebinar toolbar, and I would definitely encourage that you take a look and download them during the webinar. And finally, after today's presentation, there will be a follow-up survey, and we ask that you complete it. Your feedback helps shape pretty much everything that we do here at the Justice Clearinghouse. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to our first instructor for today. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you, Aaron, and good afternoon, everybody. Before we get started, a couple days ago, the good folks over at FT reminded me that this webinar was occurring on the same day as the National Law Enforcement Candlelight Vigil. Tonight, there's 307 law enforcement officers who will be honored for their ultimate sacrifice and service to their communities and country. And so I thought it might be a good idea, and FT thought it would be a good idea to take this moment, just a quick second, to turn our collective thoughts towards them and their families. There are some links available online in various different places to live stream the ceremonies tonight, and I kind of would want to recommend everybody try to get on tonight beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern. So on to the presentation. I'm not going to take up too much time. I did want to give a little bit of a perspective of MROS from a national level and from a programmatic level. I'm going to do that pretty quick because, as is the case in most instances, the main show is much better than the warm-up act here. So here on your screen, you'll see the NIBIN minimum required operating standards. Probably everybody has seen those. I'm not going to go through each one, but you will notice that 3 of those 7 include timely information or timeliness or some sort of time standard. And so I'm going to focus this next 2 slides on the next slide, sort of on the timeliness side of things. And we're going to start with the operational history of NIBIN. Now, this is not going to be nearly as boring as that title suggests, but I am going to begin sort of in the late 1990s when NIBIN comes online, and it begins, and it is limited investigative capability. And so we're in a range there where there's not much investigative capability with it. When it is investigatively valuable, it's generally towards cold cases. And then the advent of HD 3D technology from FT changes the entire environment. We're getting into a role now where NIBIN is accurate enough to generate investigative activity. And that kind of turned everything on its ear, and time started to become a factor. Most investigators across the country that were participating or had part of their department, a NIBIN program, were ignoring things that were 2 or 3 months old. And so it was difficult to start to push on them about the investigative capabilities, although we kind of knew that it was there, especially after that HD 3D implementation. Now, the realized objectives of NIBIN, what we have now is basically, not now, but then, was this growing number of sites that were all sort of managing their programs independently. ATF side of the house and some other places were pushing for the investigative capabilities, but still investigators remained unimpressed. They were seeing leads coming in late as lost opportunity as opposed to investigative advantage. A couple places did start to realize some success, however, and in examination of those locations where there was investigative success, timeliness became a critical factor in each one of them. So timeliness started to really rise to the top of what makes NIBIN valuable, immediately valuable to investigators, and sort of what makes it irrelevant. Program national expansion and MROS. So the program is continuing to expand now. ATF makes an internal move to take the NIBIN program from its laboratory, forensics laboratory directorate, into its field operations directorate, where the investigations are occurring. That's a major move because it solidifies NIBIN now as an investigative tool, as much as, if not even sort of emphasizing more than a forensic laboratory tool. And I'll get to a place where we see this coming together, where there isn't one being stressed over the other, where there's this sort of partnership now. But certainly that move that ATF made from forensics into operations sealed NIBIN's role in investigations. During this time, the 4 critical steps emerged, and I'm sure everybody is familiar, and anybody that's been in the NIBIN program for a while is very familiar with the 4 critical steps that came out. Timeliness obviously was one of those. Still, however, we had a growing number of sites, but still no standards. And so that each site was sort of managing their program based on their own sort of idea how they wanted to do it. When we started to realize, because of the HD 3D technology, and what was being realized was that we were seeing more or horror stories than success stories. That is, we were seeing the missed opportunities. It's funny that HD 3D and the focus on investigation started to show lost opportunity more than it showed advantage for a time period. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the programmatic necessity of MROS. And I think that's important because what ended up happening was that a continuous and rapidly expanding program and a real realization across the country that it has benefit to investigations. There's no question anymore, and there's no real debate as to its role in investigations. And then in 2017, Congress and DOJ allotted ATF what I think may be the biggest allotment above the budget, specifically for NIBIN. It resulted in the establishment of 22 new sites. I don't know if anybody was a part of that. Somebody on this call may have very well been a part of that, but 22 new sites. It was big. But of course, with that additional funding and with additional funding over the budget years, Congress gets curious. And Congress wants to ask questions, and Congress started to ask questions. And one of the questions that continuously came up was the question of standards. A national program, tons of money, standards. And so the MROS history and the Crime Gun Intelligence Governing Board, I think, is very important because while these things aren't happening, and it's important that I sort of caveat this is not happening in the stepped process that I'm presenting it. A lot of these things are overlapping. It's very dynamic as this is moving forward. And we went from the late 90s, if you recall, up through 2017 now, through 2000. And MROS history and the Crime Gun Intelligence Governing Board is an important aspect of this process and this development and this genesis. The Crime Gun Intelligence Governing Board consists of some extremely successful practitioners in the fields of forensics, in the fields of law enforcement, and prosecution. And top on the agenda for that board as an advisory board to ATF was the development of standards for NIBIN. And one of the things that was initially presented is that if law enforcement wants a NIBIN lead the day of the event, which is not possible, and it's not acceptable to have it happen 6 months or the lead to be generated 6 months, that brought a range into view that a debate could start and a conversation could start as to where in that range did it fall. And after about a year of discussion and debate, the board recommended these minimum required, or those that we saw on the first slide, those minimum required operating standards. And ATF obviously accepted the board's recommendation and implemented them. Now, I threw in this very important, at the end of this, my initial presentation here, MROS's impact on other laboratory processes. MROS was never intended to or considered to be in competition of any other forensic process. In fact, it was meant to remain flexible and be able to incorporate both existing technologies in forensics as well as emerging and new technologies in forensics into its operation. MROS's position, or the MROS position, or at least the board's position, I think, was always to incorporate all of it. It's as important as the others. not less important than the others. And that sort of is the perspective from the national viewpoint. That kind of gives a basis for the genesis of MROS. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It certainly didn't happen arbitrarily. There were a lot of events that occurred over a very long period of time that led to the implementation of these standards. And so with that, I'll finish mine and turn it over to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division of Forensic Services Laboratory, and then immediately following that, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of South Carolina.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Cromer. As Michael said, I am the NIBIN Program Administrator here at SLED, which is what we call South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. And I've been working on NIBIN for about 20 years now. And we here at SLED have been working hard to try to find a program that works well for our state. And on the next slide, you'll see that SLED offers law enforcement and forensic services to all of the counties of South Carolina. That includes local, state, federal. All of these law enforcement agencies can come to us for assistance, whether it be law enforcement assistance or forensic services. So back in 2014, we started to take a hard look at our NIBIN program because there were only 2 sites in the state that offered entry into NIBIN, and that was here at SLED and then one at the Charleston County Sheriff's Office. And we were only entering what came in to our forensic laboratory for the full firearms casework. So we were getting leads, but as Michael said, it wasn't timely, and timely is important. So when we were taking a look, we wanted to see how we can make things faster and streamline the process. So on the next slide, we came up with the entry by appointment program. We started this at the end of 2014 with only a few select agencies. We did this so that way we could get feedback and make our program more successful. And with the agencies that we started, they started enjoying this program and they started inviting other agencies to come into the program. And our firearms examiners were looking at the cases that were submitted for the full firearms exam, and they would actually call up these submitters and talk to them and find that they really just wanted their stuff entered into NIBIN and to see if they could find some leads. So that really helped our firearms examiner's caseload. On the next slide, we'll talk about how our entry by appointment program works. We offer 3 types of appointments. We offer an entry appointment, a test fire appointment, and what I call a combination appointment, where you can do some entry and test firing. And sometimes when you hear the word appoint, it gives you a negative connotation, but that's really for benefit. Working in a crime lab for as long as I have, I've seen people come in with evidence and have to wait to get their stuff logged in. And I didn't want that for our NIBIN program people. I wanted them, when they got here, to be able to get their stuff in as soon as possible and get back out on the road, whether it is the evidence custodian coming, the chief of police coming, or the detective themselves. No one wants to waste time sitting around a lab when they can be out there doing their job. On the next slide, we'll talk about how it actually works. When an agency calls for an appointment, we send them what I call our welcome package, and some of those sheets are included in the handout. One is just an informational sheet about the program. The other one is our EBA form, entry by appointment form, and that is a computerized drop-down select, you can type in it form. And then if they need it, we will also offer them test firing instructions so they can perform their own test fires. If this is their first appointment, we will walk them through it. We encourage them to bring a couple small cases. We will show them the triage process. We'll help them fill out their paperwork. And another reason why appointments are good is we want to make sure that we have entry personnel here available. Currently, we only have 5 people that can do entry, but I wanted to make sure that, people weren't in training or no one was out on sick leave. Also, it doesn't happen very often, but we wanted to make sure that our equipment is not down for maintenance or being used for training purposes. On the next slide, when an agency calls for an appointment, they're sent all these paperworks, and this is the EBA form. The top part of the form holds all that contact information that we need if we're going to notify them of a lead. The bottom part, it has their agency's case number, their incident type, incident date, all the information that we need to enter into NIBIN. And this can hold up to 10 cases. And we use their incident number, their case number. It's not given a SLED lab number because it's never logged into our system. And then on the bottom of the form is what I call my multi-purpose statement for anybody that is ANAB accredited. It has the scope of the database search, also that this is their notification that these items of evidence or test fires have been evaluated for entry. The person who comes for the appointment signs it. The IBIS personnel who enters the specimens into NIBIN signs it, and then they get a copy of it to go home with them. And on the next slide, when they come in for their appointment, they're signed in. And as you can see, I've put little MROS numbers underneath it. And so that way you'll know that those are consistent with a certain standard. And one of the standards is that you have to keep a list of approved personnel that have entered your NIBIN room. The other main point of our program is we never take custody of their evidence. Their evidence is theirs. We don't want it, not at this time, not till it's logged in. So they are in control of that evidence throughout the time they are here. They open it, hand it to us. We triage it, which is another MROS standard. We enter what needs to be entered. We hand those things back to the customer. We provide all of the things that they can seal it up their evidence with. Then we give them a copy of that form, which is also an MROS standard that you keep a log of what's entered, and then the customer can leave. On the next slide, we'll talk about a test fire appointment. Because we have so many small departments in South Carolina that may not have the resources to test fire their own guns, this request came through when we started the program and we were taking feedback. And they wanted to be able to bring their guns here and shoot them and still go through the EBA program without having to log them into the lab. So what we do is, it's just like the regular entry appointment, but they come in, we take them to our bullet recovery area, they open the gun box, hand us the gun, we'll shoot it and hand it back to them. And the gun never leaves their custody because they can observe us shooting the firearm. If they come here for a test fire appointment, we provide the ammunition and we provide test fire envelopes at that time. Then the next slide. And this is another main point of our program, is that we don't treat test specimens as evidence. We do not keep a chain of custody on them. We tell all of our customers, if you get a lead that you want confirmed, as a firearms examiner, I want the firearm. We will ask you, if you're going to submit it to us to be confirmed, we're going to ask you to submit the gun. If they decide during that test specimen test firing appointment, they can either decide to stay and watch their test specimens be entered, or they can just leave them and we'll enter them in between appointments and then give them back to them. If they decide they want to just leave the test specimens with us, we'll date stamp them so that way we know when they came into the laboratory. Then we're going to talk about leads on the next slide. Actually, we're going to talk about test specimens again. Agencies that have the ability to test fire their own ammunition don't need an appointment to drop them off. They just drop them off at the laboratory at any time. Another request that came in from our ATF, local ATF, was for the ability to agencies to mail us their test specimens. And as long as they have that EBA form in there, they can mail them to us. Usually they mail it 2-day priority. And once they get here, we date stamp them. So now we're going to talk about lead notifications. Once our entries are done, we do our correlations and secondary reviews as soon as possible. We fill out our lead forms, and they undergo another quality check with us. We'll have one person fill out the lead form from our leads that we've printed off the match point. Then they will go to a second person, usually the NIBIN program administrator, or we've appointed a NIBIN program assistant, which also helps with the MROS. We will disseminate those leads after we've checked them for any clerical errors, and we will send them out at one time. The thing that's different about our lead forms is if that lead includes 12 cases, you're going to get all 12 cases information on that lead form. That way, when an investigator is looking at what he has, he can see all of the cases that are potentially linked at one time. So, on the next slide, we'll talk about how this helps us with MROS. After we talk about lead notifications, sorry about that. Our lead notifications are sent to the person on the EBA form, and then they are sent to any person that that agency specifically requests. Also, we send them to the local ATF in that area. I cannot say enough about our local ATF agents. They are a wonderful and valuable resources to be used. And then all of them get them at the same time. So next slide. Okay, how this helps us with our MROS. Well, they want everything entered within 2 business days. Through our EBA program, evidence is entered the day it gets here. So far in 2020, 94% of our entries into NIBIN have been through the EBA program, meaning they were entered the day they got here. In 2019, 90% of our entries were through the EBA program. Also, we triage our evidence that same day and then do the entry. Next slide, please. This also helps us with our feedback loop. And I kind of feel like this is sometimes the hardest thing to get progress with. But since we are forging these relationships with our customers, we know them very well, they're more likely to email us, pick up a phone, call us, or tell us when they come for their next appointment how valuable that lead was to them. Next slide, please. Now, anyone who knows me knows I love my numbers and I love my stats. So, from our first full year of the EBA program, which was in 2015, to last year, we had a 257% growth in the number of entries. We also had over 1,000% growth in our leads, which we are now averaging about the same number of leads as we had the whole year of 2015. And the number of appointments, it's almost doubled every year since 2016, the amount of people that want to come in for an appointment. I provide stats every month to my administration, and I think one of the most important stats or impressive stats that I can give them is the number of leads we found involving the number of agencies in the number of states, because it's not uncommon for us to have out-of-state leads. So, next slide, I'm going to give y'all some advice if you want to start a NIBIN program of your own. What I would do is I would reach out and find programs that you think are successful and talk to those places. I can't tell you how many places I've talked to, requested their SOPs, looked over them. Everyone in the NIBIN program is happy to assist. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, but listen to your customers, listen to your contributors. They'll tell you what they need. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about promoting your program. On the next slide, please. Now, promotion is important. Get out there and talk about NIBIN. My program assistant and myself, before COVID, were going about once a month to a meeting, a sheriff's meeting, a chief's meeting, a roundtable discussion, gang conferences. We were meeting with agencies that we felt weren't participating enough in NIBIN to get out there and talk. Inevitably, some of these big meetings, we always find one person who goes, well, I didn't know about NIBIN. So it's always good to get out there and talk to people. Don't be afraid, if you're going to talk to someone, to ask your local ATF to assist you. They are a great resource. And they can also get in touch with these agencies and teach them about test firing and submitting their test fires. Again, your customers will promote for you. I had the privilege of giving a little short informational training session to the assistant U.S. attorneys in our state. And that's where I met our next presenter, Justin Holloway. He has been a great resource for us. He's a great promoter of NIBIN. He invited us to give a NIBIN talk at one of their training seminars. But it's also good to, when you discuss or when you approach these other agencies, I can give the lab perspective, I can give the firearms perspective, but it's good to have someone like Justin who can give the prosecutorial side, or take an ATF agent who can give the investigative side of the program. Not only can Justin give the prosecutorial side, but he's also been a great resource for these agencies for the grant assistance side. My contact information was up there. If you need anything, if you would like to email me, I can get back in touch with you at any time. Thank you so much, and please stay healthy.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hey guys, Justin Holloway here. Normally when I'm in front of a group, I can just ask people to raise their hands and make sure they can hear me, but I assume that Aaron will come yelling at me if my audio is actually incorrect. As Suzanne kind of put it and kind of laid it out there, South Carolina is a state that's really been NIBIN depraved, or NIBIN. We have not been rich in NIBIN resources for years, and we had at SLED, at the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, we had one NIBIN machine, and then we had another NIBIN machine down in the Low Country at the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, and SLED got a second NIBIN machine this past year. So you're working with somebody, if we've got anybody on this webinar that's from maybe a rural state or a state that also doesn't have a whole lot of NIBIN resources, you can look at what SLED put together by their entry by appointment program. And, I think two things show from those stats and the increase of acquisitions is, one, you've had somebody leading that program, and Suzanne and her team, that have really marketed and promoted the impact that NIBIN can have, along with the ATF. As Suzanne said, we've got some really, really good ATF agents in South Carolina who know this technology inside out, who will go and be hands-on with local law enforcement to explain, how impactful NIBIN can be. But also, you had a really unique program in which Suzanne and SLED were able to, meet the MROS, minimum required operating standards, and get these leads so that they can be useful. And one of the things that I really want to touch on and go through in some of these case examples is how NIBIN can be so useful. I've got 3 different case examples that we're going to start with, and then there's actually a proactive investigation that we just did in Columbia, South Carolina, that was completely based on NIBIN, and I want to talk to you guys about a little bit as well. And really, one of the big things that I've noticed, and Suzanne talked about it, how we've gone directly to different agencies, whether in South Carolina you have sheriff's offices or sheriff's departments, and you have police departments, and just met with, whether it's the head of their major crimes department or the sheriff himself or the chief himself, and really, walk them through this kind of technology, because it has to be a top-down commitment to get that kind of culture of collection. So I think anybody who's active in NIBIN and using NIBIN routinely would say that it's all based, the usefulness is based on the amount of acquisitions, the amount of information that NIBIN can take in. If we're only going to do acquisitions or submit casings from violent crime incidents, that's not going to get us there when we get somebody pulled over with a crime gun underneath their seat, or somebody with a gun in their backpack, that kind of thing. So Aaron, if we can move to the next slide, we'll start going through a couple cases that we've had here in South Carolina that show how useful it can be. So this first one is from April of 2018, and this was in Columbia, South Carolina. And this is something you see every single day. So you've got law enforcement responding to an apartment complex or patrolling an apartment complex known for gun violence. While on patrol, you've got agents and officers who had identified a known offender with a gun sticking out of his pants pocket. They arrested the offender, and very quickly they were able to get that gun, make an appointment with SLED, get it fired, get it test fired, get the casing entered in the NIBIN. Suzanne and her team turned it around. This was somebody who was arrested on a federal criminal complaint. And at the detention hearing, we were able to use the fact that this gun was also connected. There's a NIBIN lead to a July 2017 shooting from 7 miles down the road. Anybody in the audience who's from, whether if it's a rural area, it might be a little farther away, but it's a metropolitan area, you're going to see these very dense shooting zones. And that'll go into this proactive investigation. But, here we are 7 miles down the road, and that's probably on the far end. But you've got a guy at the hearing. We were able to put forward evidence that the gun that this individual was found with had been used at a prior shooting incident. So I think, one of the things that always comes to surface, and I'm going to show you guys some examples. And I seriously, I did not handpick these because they are testimonials to this. It's just so current. Is one, these crime guns are constantly getting passed around. When you talk about stopping that shooting cycle, nothing shows how often these crime guns are used in shootings until you're really using NIBIN effectively and constantly. And you start to see that these guns are used over and over again, especially in group or gang settings where the crime guns just get passed along to another group member. And another thing is that, I love this fact, and it's applicable pretty much across the country, and it just differs ever so slightly, that in South Carolina, what we've seen is that 5 to 7% of our offender population are responsible for upwards to 80 to 85% of the violent crimes that are committed. So although you've got this criminal population, which obviously in and of itself is a small subset of the population, it's only about 5 to 7% of those folks that are actual trigger pullers. So if we can use NIBIN to better identify the folks that are in possession of these guns that are being used in shooting incidents and the folks that are actually pulling the triggers, we're going to have a significant impact at reducing violent crime. As for this individual right here, at the time he was arrested, he was out on bond on state charges for attempted murder and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. And he had previously been convicted for a domestic violence incident that involved a firearm, and also for an assault and battery in the first degree, in which he shot a victim during a robbery. And A and B first is an offense in state court in South Carolina that carries up to 10 years. So it's a pretty significant offense. It's something that you often see getting pled to if you don't have victim cooperation. So here's a guy that had 2 prior convictions, violent convictions, where firearms were involved, both situations, out on bond for attempted murder. And we get him with a firearm that was connected to a prior unsolved shooting from just a year before. If we can go to the next slide. So here's a separate investigation in Walterboro, South Carolina. And this is one, ladies and gentlemen, that I'll go through, in which not only was ATF able to use NIBIN to connect this individual to the firearm to further prove up possession, but they also started looking down the avenue of straw purchasing. Here in South Carolina, our 2 biggest sort of avenues for all these crime guns come from either straw purchasing or they come from auto break-ins. And what we're seeing consistently is if you have a group dynamic, we're seeing a situation in which the younger group members are going in, breaking into automobiles. So you've got your just typical 16 to 22, 23-year-old breaking into automobiles, without much of a criminal history. That's a routine probation charge in state court. They know this. The organization knows this. And then these guns are just they're getting passed around the group. But this is a situation where we had a straw purchasing. As you can see here, and the facts kind of show, in March of 2018, law enforcement stopped the defendant's vehicle at a traffic safety checkpoint. Again, this is every weekend kind of thing right here. Officers located a loaded 40 caliber pistol under the driver's seat. So you got multiple people in the car. You're dealing with a constructive possession case. Obviously, it's strengthened a little bit by the fact that the 40 caliber pistol is under the driver's seat, and it was the driver who was the defendant in this case. But 9 times out of 10, this vehicle's not registered to the driver. That driver's going to say that he's borrowing his friend's car. You're dealing with proof issues here. The defendant's girlfriend comes up, and she, at a detention hearing, she claims that she purchased the gun and claimed possession of it. And this was put forward, as you'll see, just in the next sentence. This guy was actually on federal supervised release. He was a gang member, and in 2017 had been convicted of aiding and abetting an attempted murder in aid of racketeering from a November 2015 gang-related shooting of 2 men. So you've got a guy who's on federal supervised release, who stopped at a traffic safety checkpoint. There's a loaded 40 caliber firearm underneath his seat. And when they rush that detention hearing, because he's on supervised release, the girlfriend comes up and claims possession of it, and then that she purchased the gun. So this is the first time this information had been relayed forward. The government, we asked for the judge to hold the hearing in abeyance for 2 days. ATF did a little research, found out that the female, that the girlfriend did in fact purchase this firearm, but she had purchased firearms before, and we're going to kind of walk into this a little bit so I can kind of lay it out for you. One of the things here, and I guess I just skipped ahead of myself, is you see in that last sentence that using NIBIN, ATF, and SLED were able to connect this 40 caliber pistol to 3 40 caliber shell casings that were recovered from the November 2015 shooting scene. So, here we go. We've got a situation where this guy's pled guilty to aiding and abetting back in this 2015 incident. This gun is underneath the driver's seat. ATF is able to connect this firearm that his girlfriend is claiming possession of directly to the incident that this individual has already pled guilty to aiding and abetting on. So we're showing stronger signs of possession there. And to kind of walk you through how this went about, taking you back about 4 years from the day of this incident, on March the 2nd of 2014, the defendant was arrested after a high-speed chase with police, and 2 pistols were found in the car, including a Jimenez Arms 9mm pistol that the same girlfriend had purchased. Well, on September the 5th of 2014, the defendant's girlfriend then purchased this 40 caliber pistol that's found underneath the driver's seat in March of 2018. And this is the same pistol where shell casings were found at this November 2015 incident. So moving forward with the prosecution, our office was able to get a pettit policy waiver and prosecuted the defendant for that possession charge from from September of 2014 as well. And then we discovered that the defendant's girlfriend had actually also purchased another 9mm pistol in 2007, which was recovered from an individual running from police in 2012. And NIBIN showed that that pistol, which was still in law enforcement possession, was connected to a shooting scene in 2011, which involved that girlfriend's late husband. So you have a girl who has a prolific tendency to purchase or straw purchase firearms. You've got an incident in which this guy, dating back to 2014, is in high-speed chases with law enforcement. And then he's involved in a gang-related shooting. And then in November of 2018, he's pulled over on a traffic safety checkpoint. That firearm connects back to the shooting. So at this point, we're able to squarely put him in possession of this firearm. And the girlfriend was prosecuted and ultimately pled guilty to her role as a straw purchaser. Yeah, next slide, please. So here's one that you're going to see. Here's an example you're going to see, just about every weekend. It's a nightclub shooting. And here is a case in which, I really think law enforcement, and especially prosecutors, can use this as a good example of determining the best forum for prosecution. So you have on April the 1st of 2018, you've got the defendant being involved in a shooting outside of a nightclub. So we've got a bunch of people out, and just to give you the background on this defendant, he was out on bond actually for an attempted murder. And in 2013, he had been charged with murder, and he was a young fella and pled guilty to a lesser included offense of assault and battery under what in South Carolina they call the Youthful Offender Act. So this is a guy who's previously been charged with murder in 2013, is out on bond for attempted murder. This guy is known in the community as a shooter. Nobody wants to talk. You've got a shooting victim who's taken to the hospital. He recovers but does not want to cooperate with law enforcement. So this guy has got an ankle monitor on because he's out on bond on that attempted murder. So there was surveillance footage from outside the club. It's dark out. You can't really make out any faces, but we've got a little bit of information that this guy was the shooter, and you can make him out enough on the video to where law enforcement is looking for him. Plus, he was out past curfew, so it was a real simple. Let's go get this guy for a bond violation. They go to his girlfriend's house, and they were tracking him on his GPS monitor. They get to the girlfriend's house. She gives consent to search the apartment. They find a 9mm pistol in the toilet tank. Using NIBIN, we match that 9mm pistol to 9mm shell casings found at the shooting scene. ATF goes and interviews him right away. He gives consent to search his apartment. In his apartment, there's not a whole lot of incriminating stuff other than a pretty unique Chicago Bulls fitted cap. And in that video, you see someone wearing, a kind of a striped red and black, what looks like a Chicago Bulls cap. So now all of a sudden we've got PC on this guy. And if you go to the next slide. So you can see here, what I really want to bring out is what's the best form for prosecution. And in South Carolina, so you got a guy who survives, but you got a victim who does not want to cooperate. And you've already got this guy out on attempted murder on the state side anyways. So attempted murder in South Carolina carries 0 to 30. A 922G charge in federal court, which is just felon in possession of a firearm or ammunition, is going to carry 0 to 10, or it's going to carry 15 to life if you're an armed career criminal. So these next three slides, and Aaron, you don't need to go to them. I just included them if we end up handing this out. We'll include actual snippets or screenshots from the United States Sentencing Guidelines. But what you can see here is, say this person is a criminal history category 1. That means that they have no criminal history whatsoever. So they're not going to be an armed career criminal. Even with these cross-references, they're going to be maxed out at 120 months. So how it works is under section 2X 1.1, it's going to tell us that when an attempt, solicitation, or conspiracy is expressly covered by another offense guideline, apply that guideline section. So there's a guideline section for attempted murder, which tells you, and I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but basically the long and short of it is, you're going to get to the point where at a minimum, you're going to have a base offense level 33, you're going to have an increase of the offense level due to the serious bodily injury that occurs, you're going to have acceptance of responsibility, and you're going to end up, even if they're the lowest criminal history category, getting 10 years. And, in the federal system, you're going to serve 85%. That's if you get the maximum amount of good time credit. There is no parole in the federal system. And then you're going to be followed up with supervised release by the United States Probation Office. So you might be looking at a much better situation, even for a guy who's not an armed career criminal. If the person's an armed career criminal, then I think you've really got to seriously look at the federal system, because there's a subsection that talks about criminal history for armed career criminals, and it tells you that if an armed career criminal, if you are an armed career criminal, meaning you have 3 or more predicate convictions that can be either serious drug offenses or violent crimes, and your crime that you're committed, in this case, the possession of a firearm, was in connection with a crime of violence, which it was, an attempted murder, then you're going to be a criminal history category 6. So just jumping to the point, that's going to be 210 to 262 months. So 180 months is 15 years. So another 30 months. So you're talking about, 17 plus years at a minimum here on an attempted murder charge for an armed career criminal. It can go up from there. And the big part is here is to get that cross-reference, all you have to show, all you have to demonstrate or prove is preponderance of the evidence. So whereas if you're in state court and you're going to trial on an attempted murder, and it is law enforcement, the prosecution's responsibility to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, all you have to show in federal court is beyond a reasonable doubt for the elements of felon in possession. And then that cross-reference for attempted murder, you have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence. And if you've got these, so we had him, let's think about this from this case setting example. We have got him in possession of that firearm from April the 7th, okay? When the firearm was found in the toilet tank. So there's no doubt there. Now we got to cross-reference it back to the April the 1st shooting. Well, we've got the NIBIN lead. So all of a sudden, our burden of proof is substantially less of a hurdle because we can show definitively that that gun was at that shooting scene, was used at that shooting scene, and then we go back and we use his GPS monitor plus the surveillance footage to show he's at the scene. So now we've got a victim that does not want to cooperate, but it's no big deal because we don't need the victim anyways. Between the surveillance footage and the NIBIN lead, we've got it, and this guy's going to go to prison. You know, somebody who's already been charged with murder before, who's out on attempted murder. He's an armed career criminal, so he's going away for 17 plus years, and we've avoided trial and not had to deal with any kind of victim issues who didn't want to serve as a witness. So it's a great example of using the federal forum to your advantage. The last part I want to get into is how NIBIN can be used in proactive investigations. So this is just, it was titled Operation Soda City, and there's 4 different investigations that I want to go into. But I mean, this is really a testament to ATF, to the ASAC here, Brian Mean, Special Agent Don Berlin, Special Agent Mike Pinelli, Chief Holbrook with Columbia Police Department, Sheriff Lott with the Richland County Sheriff's Department, Jim Modulewski with Columbia PD as well, who's in charge of their crime gun intelligence unit. You know, basically we had local and federal law enforcement came together. They used NIBIN data from April the 1st to September the 30th of 2019. So they got 6 months worth of NIBIN data. And combing through shooting incidents in Columbia, South Carolina for that same period and combining that with NIBIN data that Suzanne and her team put together, ATF and Columbia PD and Richland County Sheriff's Department were able to identify 5 high-density shooting zones in Columbia. Zones 1 through 5. And from there, they use confidential informants and other undercover agents to purchase firearms and drugs during a 60-day sting operation. And I'm going to go through a few of these investigations. I know we're getting close on time. But in investigation 1, you've got, and I just want to show you how often these guns are being used. So Aaron, if we go to the next slide. So what we were able to show earlier with these guys was constantly they were out on bond for violent crimes or had been previously convicted of violent crimes. Here's going to be some scenarios of these guns being used in close temporal proximity to when these people were arrested. So basically you've got in investigation 1, you've got officers conducting several drug and gun buys from the defendants. A number of the guns that ATF and local law enforcement purchased have been reported stolen or were used in prior shootings. And here, there was an Iberia Arms 40 caliber pistol that was sold by the defendant on February the 13th of 2020. This gun was reported stolen on October the 23rd of 2019, and it had been used, NIBIN shows it had been used in shooting incidents on November the 29th and December the 3rd. So you're talking about stolen the 23rd, used a month later, and then used 5 days after that. And it's sold to law enforcement less than 3 months later, 2.5 months later. It shows how quick these hot guns are getting sold and put into the next hand. This person was arrested on a criminal complaint. And ladies and gentlemen, if y'all don't have ShotSpotter, obviously it's a technology I wish we could have throughout South Carolina. Columbia is the only place that we have it. However, what we've seen, what the analysts at Columbia PD have told me, is that about 75% of the shooting incidents in Columbia were going unreported because now they're getting, due to these acoustic sensors, Columbia PD and 911 dispatch get automatic alerts. they're responding to every shooting. And we've learned that in the past year that approximately 75% of the shootings in Columbia were previously going unreported. So it truly has, the combination of ShotSpotter and NIBIN has significantly increased the usefulness and effectiveness of our investigative use of NIBIN. Investigation 2, Aaron, next slide. Guys, similar situation. We've got a defendant who's arrested on March the 12th. Or sorry, this is the same investigation that's continued. Not only was this gun that the defendant, not only had he sold a crime gun that had been reported stolen and used in 2 prior shootings, but when he's arrested, law enforcement recovered a firearm that had been also used in 2 prior shootings. One was from July the 3rd, and one was from the previous day. The previous day, law enforcement had responded out to a domestic incident, and then 45 minutes later, there's a shooting incident in which the victim of that domestic incident says the defendant and her brother got into an argument. They arrest this defendant the next day. You know, everybody knew that this guy was a suspect or a subject of this investigation, and this was the firearm that was actually used. So you know, we've got these hot guns that are being used repeatedly. Okay, I'm going to kind of jet through investigations 2 through 4. This is one, ladies and gentlemen. It's same, and you know, this is part of the Operation Soda City. They've had law enforcement done numerous drug buys from the defendant. They arrest him, and subsequent to the arrest, they recover a firearm during the search warrant that was linked to an ag assault incident on November 27th. So investigation 3 is the next slide. So here, you know, this was one, you know, guns just being used repeatedly in shootings. We've got a documented gangster disciple gang member. ATF has purchased numerous firearms from him. He's arrested on March 9th. During the investigation, agents purchased a Taurus 9mm. This was connected to 3 shooting incidents: December the 12th, December the 14th, and January 16th. So in 35 days, 34 days, this crime gun was used 3 different times. And we've got, you know, now we've got we recovered that gun from the individual who was in possession of it. And investigation 4 is the last one I want to touch on. In investigation 4, you know, to hit the highlights, basically Richland County Sheriff's Department, which is the county in which Columbia is located, responded to 2 separate shootings. One was April the 26th of 2019. One was August the 13th of 2019. And then 4 days after that, August the 13th, Columbia Police Department responded to an apartment complex after getting a call of numerous individuals driving around with guns. They stopped and talked to the person who became a target. They found a Springfield 9mm in the backseat of the defendant's vehicle. This was the same gun that was connected to the April and the prior August shooting incidents. So instead of targeting the gun, they targeted this individual due to his connection to NIBIN incidents or crime guns. And as you can see here, during the investigation, they had purchased a firearm that was linked to a November the 15th shooting, and then they purchased a second firearm that was linked to a December 13th shooting. So it all starts with a guy getting arrested or getting speaking to law enforcement in August, found in possession of a firearm that was connected to 2 other shooting incidents, and then he goes while he's out on bond and sells 2 more firearms that have also been connected to other shooting incidents. So really, NIBIN led the way on this, and you're talking about completely objective data serving as the basis and the foundation of an investigation. And that's just so powerful when you're explaining that to the judge. And if any of these go to trial, then I think it will be equally powerful. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Justin. I'm just going to take 30 seconds here to sort of sum up before we go to questions. One of the things that you'll notice weaving through both presentations, absent mine, is innovation. And I think that to move it back into MROS, MROS is creating some innovative practices in timeliness. And when those innovative practices in timeliness start to show themselves, then in investigations and prosecutions, innovation occurs. You'll see some of that sentencing stuff that was a little dry, but extremely exciting if you looked at it close. They're leveraging things in innovative prosecution side of things that they might not have otherwise considered or been able to even get to. And it has its genesis in timely NIBIN leads. And I really liked the way it played together like that. And I think that innovation may be the takeaway here, because you see it happening from the laboratory side, the investigative side, and the prosecution side. So, Aaron, I know you were fielding questions if there were any.
Oh boy, we do have a lot of really great questions. Justin, Suzanne, Michael, thank you guys for a fantastic presentation. Thanks to the folks at Ultra, as always, for finding amazing presenters like you guys. We've already received a lot of questions. I did want to share a couple of comments from the audience. Pete Gagliari wanted to congratulate Suzanne on really nice work with the entry by appointment program. And Megan from Susanna PD also wanted to thank everyone for the great information that you shared. Our next Ultra webinar is scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern on July 23rd. We'll let you know in emails once the final slate of panelists is selected for that webinar. And Mike, if you're ready, I'd love to start working our way through some of these questions. We'll get through as many as we possibly can.
Sure, absolutely, if I can answer them.
Perfect. And I'll go ahead and direct them to you. Feel free to redirect them to whoever
Great.
you think would best answer it. All right. So first question is from Rachel. What approach would you take if police indicate that they cannot submit firearms evidence to the lab any faster than they already do, such as in 7 days?
Okay, I think that's a great question for Suzanne to take and kind of address that.
Well, as a state lab, if they're saying they can't get it here until 7 days after the crime, really they're only hurting themselves. We can't dictate when they bring it to us, but we can dictate how timely we can turn it around. If they do bring it in within 7 days of the crime, we're going to get it entered and we're going to get it correlated and we're going to get their leads back to them as soon as possible. We are an assistance agency, so we can't tell them, no, sorry, it's already 7 days old. But what we do tell people is if you do have a backlog of stuff, the older cases are going to wait, the newer first. So that's how we really approach that.
Great. Thank you so much. The next question is from Jenna. How do you handle an appointment? And I think this probably is for you as well, Suzanne. How do you handle an appointment with an agency that has 50 or more cartridge casings for a single case?
What we do here, most of us are firearms examiners that handle the NIBIN program, and if we do have a large triage case coming in, we get another firearms examiner. First, we will separate them out by caliber, so we can potentially have 2 different firearms examiners triaging and then one doing the entry. So if they tell us in advance that they're going to have a large shooting coming in, we typically have more personnel to help triage.
Got it. Great. The next question is from Russell. Do analysts at SLED provide an operability test fire report when test firing other agencies' firearms?
No, we don't. If they want an operability report, they would need to submit it through the traditional lab means. Obviously, if we get test specimens from it, it was functional, but we do not offer an operability report.
Great. And while we're at it, another question from Kristen for you, Suzanne. Does your lab have ANAB accreditation? And also, if an officer leaves the test-fired cartridge case at the lab, will they then get logged in and assigned a lab number?
Our lab does have accreditation status. We did not seek it for the EBA program at this time, but we are in the future going to try to get accreditation status for our IBIS program. We do not log in the test fires. What we do is we enter them. We keep an EBA form with them, sign and date when they are entered. So that way, the next time that agency comes into the laboratory, we just hand them the test specimens back with their EBA form.
Got it. Great.
And I believe I
love this
answered
next
most of those parts of that question.
Yeah, I think you did too. Kristen, let me know if you have any follow-up questions for Suzanne. The next question is from Rachel. Do you have any data on whether there is more evidence being recovered from incidents by officers, thus resulting in an increased number of NIBIN entries?
If that's for me, I do not have more data on that. I know since Columbia PD has gotten ShotSpotter, I know we're getting more entries from them, and we've actually partnered with them a lot on their crime gun intelligence task force. But I do not have data on increase of shootings in the state.
Got it. Mike, Justin, have you heard of anything with other agencies you've worked with about whether or not they're seeing an increase in the number of NIBIN entries?
Yeah, I mean, this is Justin here. Sorry, Mike. Let me defer to you.
Okay.
You go first.
Yep. No. I just wanted to say that this is the program feeds itself. The success, the quick turnarounds turn into really great successes, which turn into more comprehensive collection, which turns into more entries and being picked up by law enforcement and submitted to the laboratory. So it sort of feeds itself, this program. So successful programs always increase in volume. I think that's been pretty much the way it goes. Justin, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And here in South Carolina, I just recently was reviewing the stats. The nation had a 3.3% reduction in violent crime in 2018 per FBI stats. 2019 stats are still being calculated. We had a little less of a reduction in South Carolina, but we also, in some of our main target areas, we had a higher number of homicides. With that said, obviously that's terrible. With that said, we also had their clearance rates on those were just as high or higher, and we've identified, through NIBIN that a lot of these shootings, even if they were non-fatal shootings or kind of drive-by shooting into a dwelling, involved a lot of the same actors. So that kind of when we were able to show that information, and Suzanne and I did a big presentation in October, and all of a sudden you had different agencies who didn't previously participate in SLED's entry by appointment program started bringing all of their casings down. It really, as Mike said, it fed itself and was self-promoting because we were getting the results that we hoped for.
Great, thank you. The next
if
question
I could
is
add
from...
something to that.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
I was going to say, we've also been fortunate enough in this state to have the ATF's mobile unit come several times. And I have seen once that unit leaves that particular area, our increase in appointment requests from that area have just skyrocketed because they've been so used to using NIBIN. And even if they weren't prior to the mobile unit being there, that they don't want to stop.
Got it, great. We also have a question from Mara asking if anyone has a copy or knows how she might be able to get a copy of the Rutgers NIBIN study. She hasn't been able to find a copy anywhere, or if you can provide some idea.
Yeah, this is Mike Eberhardt. That is an interesting sort of slippery study. I have, and probably she has in her possession, the PowerPoint that they put together relative to the study. I mean, I've been in touch with New Jersey State Police and Rutgers, and didn't get a response from Rutgers. From New Jersey State Police, they provided the PowerPoint as well. I'm assuming she has the PowerPoint. If not, I can make it available. But as an absolute study, I'm not sure one exists. I think they did it on PowerPoint. If you look at it closely, it kind of has the appearance. So I think that might not even, as a paper, a published study, might not even exist.
Got it. Well, if anyone else out there might have any of that documentation, please feel free to forward it to me, and I'll make sure
Yes.
that I get it
And
to
give me a
Mike and
copy,
anyone
please.
else.
Yeah, thank
That'd
you.
be fantastic. All right, and I know that this next question is also for you, Suzanne. Are your Suzanne, James is wondering how many how many NIBIN terminals you currently have.
We only had the one until last October. We got a Project Safe Neighborhood grant for a second terminal, which has been wonderful.
Fantastic. The next question is from Dion. Do you have any influence on the agencies that submit test fires to your agency? If so, how did you get them on board to provide test fires instead of participating in the EBA process?
A lot of that is from our local ATF. If we hear of an agency that has maybe a large backlog of firearms that they've confiscated and then all of a sudden they want to participate in the EBA program, I will get them in touch with a local ATF agent so they can figure out how to best test fire these firearms. Again, we tell them newest guns confiscated first, but typically that's where we use our resource of our local ATF agents. We get them to assist with the test firing if that agency wants to test fire their own.
Got it. Great. And our last question for today is going to go to Brian. And Brian says, Knoxville, Tennessee is the largest law enforcement agency in East Tennessee. And Brian is growing his NIBIN program and doing NIBIN work for multiple surrounding agencies. Do any of you have suggestions for a length of time to retain NIBIN test fire cartridge cases for their agencies, for their agency as well as those that I'm serving?
I can take this. We recommend after we enter those test fires, we give them back to the agency, but we do put a lovely little bright green sticker on it that asks that they keep their evidence or test specimens for 2 years. Now, we do insist that, or if they sell it or if they return the gun to an owner, perhaps it was stolen, that they call and let us know so we can change the status in NIBIN to test fire returned. That way, and we explain it to them because most of them don't understand that once the gun is confiscated and entered into NIBIN, it's not correlated against later dates or later incidents. So if they call and let us know, and that's what that sticker is there for. It's a big reminder to say, hey, if we're going to get rid of this, why don't we, give SLED a call and just tell them that we're selling it or we're returning it to the owner so it can be correlated against new crimes. But our standard rule of thumb on our on our sticker says to keep for 2 years, but we typically haven't seen leads that long.
Got it. Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Justin, Suzanne, Mike, thank you all so much for a fantastic presentation. Thank you to our audience, not only for being here today, but asking such fantastic questions. Certainly want to thank Ultra Electronics Forensic Technology, again, for coordinating this webinar, for finding such amazing presenters, such amazing panelists. And I hope that everyone is able to join us again for our next Ultra webinar on July 23rd at 1 o'clock Eastern. We'll make sure that we send out emails to everyone who registered for this webinar. And with that, concludes this afternoon's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. Take care, everyone, and please stay healthy. Bye now.